I never thought I'd be standing at my 7-year-old son's funeral alone. No father should have to do that. Yet here I was, staring at Ethan's mahogany casket, clutching his worn Superman cape that he insisted would give him strength during his battle with leukemia, strength I couldn't give him in his final moments. The morning light caught the gold lettering on his casket, each letter a dagger to my heart. Ethan Michael Thompson, beloved son, our little superhero. The weight of silence in St. Michael's Cathedral pressed down on me like a physical force. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting rainbow shadows across Ethan's casket. Too small, impossibly small. He had always loved those colorful patterns, would spend hours trying to catch them with his hands during Sunday service, giggling as they danced across his fingers. Even during his worst days in the hospital, he would ask me to make shadow puppets on the wall, pretending they were superheroes flying through those same rainbow lights. Now they danced across the polished wood surface, but he wasn't here to see them. Every detail of the service had been meticulously planned. The white roses Ethan loved because they reminded him of clouds. The choir ready to sing his favorite hymns. The small collection of action figures lined up beside the guest book, each one representing a battle he had faced with unfailing courage. The program even included a comic-style illustration of Ethan as a superhero, something he had drawn himself during one of his better days in the hospital. "Every superhero needs an origin story, Dad," he had said, his small hands steady despite his weakness. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably another condolence message. They had been flooding in all morning, each one a reminder of how our tight-knit community of Cedar Grove rallied around tragedy. The small town had watched Ethan grow up, had celebrated his victories, and mourned his setbacks throughout his illness. Teachers, neighbors, even the barista at the local coffee shop, who always saved Ethan's favorite blueberry muffins, they had all become part of our extended family during his battle. I pulled out my phone reflexively, expecting another thoughts and prayers text from well-meaning friends. Instead, my world tilted on its axis. The image was crisp, time-stamped less than an hour ago. Sarah, my wife of 12 years, lounging on a pristine Hawaiian beach, her skin sun-kissed and glowing. A man I didn't recognize, young, athletic, with tribal tattoos snaking down his arms, had his hand possessively on her waist. They were both laughing, cocktails raised in a toast, with Diamond Head Crater rising majestically in the background. The caption below read, "Thought you should see what your grieving wife is really doing today. A concerned friend." The phone nearly slipped from my trembling fingers. My mother, Margaret, steadied my arm, her grip firm but gentle. "Michael, you're shaking, sweetheart." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The image burned into my retinas, a stark contrast to the solemn funeral setting around me. The diamonds on her wedding ring, the one she had sworn symbolized our eternal love, caught the Hawaiian sun as she lifted her glass in celebration. Sarah wasn't here because of an unavoidable medical conference in Boston, like she'd claimed. She was sipping Mai Tais in Waikiki with some stranger while I prepared to bury our son. The son who had asked for his mother every day during his last week, whose fevered dreams had been filled with calls for mommy. The son whose final coherent words were, "When is mom coming?" A question I couldn't answer then, and couldn't bear to think about now. The image of Sarah on that Hawaiian beach refused to leave my mind as I gripped the edges of the pulpit. The contrast was almost surreal. While I stood here in my black suit, my heart weighted with grief. She was basking in tropical sunshine, wrapped in the arms of a stranger. The pastor's introduction faded into background noise, as my thoughts spiraled through the past few months, searching for signs I should have seen sooner. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, Another message from the same unknown number. Here's something else you should see. This time, the photo showed Sarah and her companion entering a luxury beachfront hotel, her hand intertwined with his, her face tilted up in laughter. The timestamp showed it was taken just this morning. The same morning, I had woken up at dawn, unable to sleep, dreading the weight of this day. A sharp pain shot through my palm. I had been gripping the pulpit so hard my wedding ring had cut into my finger. The irony wasn't lost on me. That ring, which Sarah had slipped onto my finger 12 years ago, with promises of forever, now drew blood on the day she chose paradise over parenthood. Michael? Pastor Richardson's gentle prompt brought me back to the present. The congregation waited, their faces a blur of sympathy and curiosity. I cleared my throat, forcing myself to focus on the words I had carefully prepared about Ethan. But now each carefully crafted sentence felt inadequate, overshadowed by the magnitude of Sarah's betrayal. I looked down at my notes, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. The words swam before my eyes as another memory surfaced. Ethan's last birthday in the hospital. Sarah had been stuck in Chicago for a medical symposium, video calling in for a brief 5 minutes before claiming poor reception. Now I wondered if she had been with him even then, this tattooed stranger who seemed to have stolen not just my wife, but my son's mother. Ethan, I began, my voice steadier than I felt, was a superhero. The familiar weight of his cape in my pocket grounded me, not because of his costume, though he wore it proudly enough to make Superman himself jealous. He was a superhero because of his heart. The congregation nodded, a few wiping away tears. In the third row, I spotted Mrs. Chen, Ethan's first grade teacher, who had visited him every week in the hospital, bringing his favorite comic books. Next to her sat Tommy Franklin and his parents. Tommy, who had shaved his head in solidarity when Ethan lost his hair to chemo. These people, this community, had shown more love and support than Sarah had in those final months. When Ethan was diagnosed, I continued, he didn't ask, why me? Instead, he asked how he could help other kids in the cancer ward feel braver. He turned his IV pole into a rocket ship, complete with cardboard fins that the nurses helped him color. He called his chemotherapy his super serum, and convinced the younger children it would give them powers like his favorite heroes. My mother's quiet sob from the front pew nearly broke my composure. She had been there through everything, the late-night hospital vigils, the ups and downs of treatment, the final devastating prognosis. While Sarah was gradually disappearing from our lives, Mom had stepped in, becoming the maternal presence Ethan desperately needed. Another buzz from my phone. I ignored it this time, but my mind wandered to Sarah's carefully constructed lies. The medical conferences that supposedly kept her away were becoming more frequent, each excuse more elaborate than the last. How long had this been going on? How many of those business trips had really been rendezvous with her island lover? Ethan never lost faith, I pressed on, the words catching in my throat. Even in his final days, he insisted on wearing his cape, telling us it would help him fly away from the pain. He believed in magic, in miracles, in the power of love to conquer anything. The bitter irony of those last words tasted like ash in my mouth. The sunlight through the stained glass shifted again, creating a kaleidoscope of colors across this congregation. Ethan would have loved this moment, would have seen it as a sign that the universe was putting on a show just for him. Sarah should have been here to see it, should have been here to share these memories, to honor the incredible child we had raised together. Instead, she was creating new memories with a stranger, thousands of miles away from her responsibilities, her grief, her family. The thought made my blood boil, but I forced the anger down. This wasn't the time or place. Ethan deserved better than to have his funeral overshadowed by adult betrayals and broken vows. In his last week, I continued, my voice dropping slightly, Ethan made me promise something. He made me promise to remember him not with sadness, but with the same joy he brought to every day of his life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's a promise I intend to keep. What I didn't mention was his other request, the one that haunted my dreams. Promise you'll tell Mom I love her when she comes back. Sarah never came back. Not for his final days, not for his last breath, and now, not even for his funeral. The weight of that broken promise pressed down on me like a physical force. I had made excuses for her absence, telling Ethan that Mom was helping other sick people, that she wished she could be here, that she loved him very much. Lies upon lies, meant to protect him from a truth I hadn't even fully understood myself until now. As I concluded the eulogy, my voice remained steady, but my mind was already racing ahead. The photographs weren't just evidence of infidelity. They were proof of a calculated cruelty that went beyond mere unfaithfulness. Sarah hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She had betrayed a dying child's trust, a sacred responsibility that should have transcended any personal desires. The congregation rose for the final hymn, their voices joining in a melody that Ethan had always loved. But beneath the solemn ceremony, beneath the grief and remembrance, something else was taking root in my heart. A determination, cold and sharp as steel, to ensure that Sarah's betrayal wouldn't go unanswered. She thought she had orchestrated the perfect escape, using our son's illness as cover for her paradise romance, using my grief as a shield for her deception. She thought, wrong. As the hymn reached its crescendo, I made a silent vow of my own. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The service would end, the mourners would leave, and I would begin piecing together exactly how deep this betrayal went. Because something told me the Hawaiian photos were just the tip of the iceberg. Sarah's carefully constructed world of lies was about to come crashing down. And when it did, no amount of tropical paradise would protect her from the truth she'd tried so hard to escape. The reception at my mother's house felt like an out-of-body experience. Covered casseroles cluttered every surface, their aluminum foil tops reflecting the afternoon light like mirrors. The air was thick with whispered conversations that died the moment I entered a room. Everyone knew Sarah wasn't here, and their silence spoke volumes. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, accepting condolences with mechanical nods and mumbled thanks. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, those damning photos burning a hole through the fabric. Part of me wanted to show everyone, to let them see Sarah's true colors. But I couldn't. Not yet. This day was for Ethan. Michael, dear. Sarah's mother, Victoria, cornered me by the fireplace where Ethan's school photos were displayed. Her perfectly manicured hand reached for my arm, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. Sarah sends her love. This conference was just unavoidable, you understand. She's devastated she couldn't be here, the lie twisted in my gut like a knife. I stared at Victoria's immaculate appearance, not a hair out of place, not a crack in her polished facade. Did she know? Was she complicit in her daughter's deception? Unavoidable, I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue, like the conference last month during Ethan's final chemotherapy session, or the emergency meeting during his birthday. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. We all cope with grief differently, Michael. Sarah's work helps her. Cope? The word came out sharper than I intended. Is that what we're calling it now? My mother appeared at my side, as if summoned by the tension in my voice. Victoria, she said coolly, I believe Robert needs help with the guest book. The dismissal was clear, and Victoria retreated, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. As soon as she was gone, I slipped away to my father's study, seeking a moment of peace. The room smelled of leather and old books, exactly as it had when Ethan would curl up here during his better days, reading comic books while I worked. I sank into the worn leather chair behind the desk, finally allowing myself to breathe. The laptop hummed to life as I opened it. Sarah and I shared online banking, a trust that now seemed laughably naive. Logging in, I began to trace our financial history over the past year. The pattern emerged quickly: regular withdrawals, always just under amounts that would trigger notifications, hotel charges disguised as medical conferences, airline tickets to destinations that didn't match her supposed business trips. But what made my blood run cold was the document I found in her cloud storage. A life insurance policy I'd never seen before, taken out on Ethan 6 months after his diagnosis. Sarah was listed as the sole beneficiary, the policy worth far more than seemed reasonable for a child's coverage. The modification date caught my eye. She had removed my name as a beneficiary just weeks before Ethan's death. I thought I might find you in here, my mother's voice came from the doorway. She carried 2 cups of coffee, setting one in front of me. What did you find? I turned the laptop toward her, watching as she scanned the documents, her face hardened with each scroll of the mouse. The woman I just saw, lounging on a Hawaiian beach with her lover, isn't devastated about missing anything, I said quietly. She's celebrating her freedom. And apparently she's been planning this escape for months. Mum's hand trembled as she set down her coffee cup. Those withdrawals, she said, pointing to the bank statement. They match the deposits I saw in Victoria's accounts when I was helping her with her taxes last month. The pieces clicked into place. Victoria hadn't just been covering for Sarah, she'd been actively helping her prepare for this moment. The realization made me feel sick while I was focused on Ethan's treatment, on giving him every possible chance at survival. My wife and her mother had been orchestrating an elaborate exit strategy. There's more, I said, pulling up another document. Sarah's been looking at property listings in Hawaii. Luxury condos, all in the same price range as that life insurance payout would provide. My mother's face darkened. She wouldn't dare. She already has. I showed her the receipt for a hefty deposit on a beachfront property dated just 3 days ago. She's not just running away. She's using our son's death to finance her new life. The rage I'd been suppressing all day finally broke through. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing through the quiet study. In the other room, I could hear the murmur of funeral guests, their quiet conversations and muffled condolences. Suddenly seeming like a cruel joke. What are you going to do? Mom asked, her voice steady despite the anger I could see burning in her eyes. I looked at Ethan's favorite reading spot, a worn beanbag chair in the corner where his comic book still sat in a neat stack. I'm going to make sure she doesn't get away with this, I said quietly. For Ethan, for everything she took from him in his final months. She thinks she's won, that she can just disappear into her paradise with her blood money and her new life. I turned back to my mother, and something in my expression made her reach for my hand. She has no idea what's coming, does she? She asked softly. No, I replied. She doesn't, but she's about to learn. The text came 3 days after the funeral, while I was sitting in Ethan's room, surrounded by the remnants of his short life. His superhero posters still covered the walls, action figures stood guard on shelves, and his collection of comic books remained perfectly organized by series and issue number, a system he had insisted on even during his sickest days. Meet me at River's Edge Coffee Shop, 2 p.m. It's about Sarah and Jason. K. Jason. So that was the name of the tattooed man from the beach photos. My jaw clenched as I read the message again. The mysterious sender from the funeral photos now had a name, K. But who were they, and how did they know about Sarah's betrayal? I arrived at River's Edge 15 minutes early, choosing a seat that gave me a clear view of both the entrance and the parking lot. The cafe sat on the outskirts of Cedar Grove, where the town's quaint charm began to fade into industrial developments. It wasn't Sarah's kind of place, too simple, too unrefined for her increasingly expensive tastes. At exactly 2 p.m., a woman walked in. She was in her early 30s, with short auburn hair and the kind of sharp features that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. Her eyes scanned the cafe with practiced efficiency before landing on me. Without hesitation, she walked over and sat down. "You must be Michael," she said, her voice carrying a slight edge. "I'm Kira, Jason's wife." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. His wife. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Soon-to-be ex-wife, thanks to your Sarah. Though I suppose we're in the same boat now, aren't we? My mind raced to process this new information. "You sent the photos from the funeral?" "Yes." Kira pulled out her phone, swiping through to show me more images. "I've been tracking their little romance for months. At first I thought Jason was just having a midlife crisis. He's a personal trainer at the resort where they met. But then I started digging." She placed a thick manila envelope on the table between us. "Your wife isn't just having an affair with my husband, Michael. They're planning something bigger. Something that involves your son's life insurance policy and a very expensive piece of real estate in Maui." My throat went dry. "How do you know about the insurance policy?" "Because Jason's been bragging about it to his friends at the gym. About how his new girlfriend is about to come into a major windfall. How they're going to start fresh in paradise." Her voice cracked slightly. "He thought I didn't know about their private email account, but he never was very good with technology. Left himself logged in on our home computer more than once." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were printouts of emails between Sarah and Jason, dating back almost 8 months, around the time Ethan's condition had begun to deteriorate rapidly. The conversations were intimate, detailed, and horrifyingly calculated. "Look at the one from March," Kira said quietly. I found the email she referenced. Sarah's words made my stomach turn. "Everything's set with the policy. Michael's too focused on Ethan's treatments to notice the changes I've made. Once this is over, we'll have more than enough to start our new life. I know it sounds cold, but I can't do this anymore. The hospitals, the constant neediness, the small town's suffocation. You're my escape, Jay. Just a little longer and we'll have everything we've dreamed of." The coffee in front of me grew cold as Kira laid out everything she'd discovered. Jason and Sarah had met at a medical conference in Hawaii 10 months ago, one of the few legitimate business trips Sarah had actually taken. But what started as a fling had evolved into an elaborate plan to escape their respective lives. "Jason cleaned out our savings last week," Kira continued, her composed facade cracking slightly. 17 years of marriage, and he emptied our accounts like they were nothing. But he messed up, left a paper trail a mile wide. And when I confronted him about it, he had the nerve to tell me I should be grateful he wasn't asking for alimony. I looked up from the emails, meeting her gaze. "Why are you showing me all this?" "Because they think they're smarter than us," she replied, her eyes hardening. "They think we're just the boring spouse and the grieving father, too wrapped up in our own misery to see what they're doing. But they're wrong. I'm a forensic accountant, Michael. Numbers are my life. And the numbers tell me they've been moving money around, setting up accounts, making plans, all while your son was fighting for his life." The mention of Ethan sparked something in me. "Sarah kept pushing for experimental treatments," I said slowly, the realization dawning. "Expensive ones, all requiring significant out-of-pocket payments. She insisted on handling the medical billing herself." Kira nodded grimly. "I found discrepancies. The amounts don't match up with standard treatment costs. I think she was inflating the numbers, skimming money off the top, using your son's illness as a cover to build her escape fund." The rage that had been simmering inside me since the funeral photos threatened to boil over. Using Ethan's death was despicable enough, but to have been stealing from his treatment fund? To have possibly limited his options while he was still fighting? It was beyond comprehension. "I have evidence," Kira continued, pulling more documents from her bag. Bank statements, transfer records, everything. Jason's not just a personal trainer. He's been acting as a financial advisor to some of his wealthy clients, though he's not licensed. He and Sarah have been using his connections to move money around, setting up offshore accounts, creating a paper trail that would be hard to follow. But you followed it, I said, studying her face. Like I said, numbers are my life. And revenge. She smiled coldly. Revenge is becoming my new hobby. They think they're going to ride off into the sunset together, using our pain to finance their happiness. I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen. I sat back, processing everything. What exactly are you proposing? A partnership, Kira replied without hesitation. I have the financial expertise to trace their schemes. You have the legal right to challenge the insurance policy and any assets Sarah's been hiding. Together, we can make sure they don't profit from their betrayal. She pulled out one final document, a preliminary report she'd compiled on Sarah and Jason's financial movements. They're planning to close on a property next month, $3 million, oceanfront. They think the insurance payout will cover their down payment, and they've been laundering money through Jason's fake investment consulting business to cover the rest. Why wait? I asked. Why show me all this now? Kira's expression darkened. Because they're getting sloppy. They think they've won, that we're too broken to fight back. Sarah's even planning to file for divorce while she's in Hawaii. She thinks the distance will make it harder for you to contest anything. But she doesn't know what we know. I stared at the stack of evidence between us, thinking of Ethan's empty room, his carefully organized comic books, his unwavering belief that good always triumphs over evil. What's our next step? First, Kira said, pulling out her laptop, we document everything. Every transaction, every email, every lie. Then we start pulling threads until their whole paradise fantasy unravels. They think they're living in a romance story, Michael. Let's show them they're actually in a tragedy of their own making. Looking at the determination in Kira's eyes, I felt something shift inside me. The overwhelming grief of the past few days crystallized into something harder, more focused. Sarah and Jason hadn't just betrayed their spouses. They had turned my son's death into a profit opportunity, had used his suffering as a smokescreen for their schemes. I'm in, I said quietly, thinking of Ethan's Superman cape still hanging in his closet. They want to play games with my son's memory. Let's show them exactly who they're dealing with. The next few days became a blur of documents, bank statements, and devastating discoveries. Kira and I converted my father's study into what looked like a detective's war room. Papers covered every surface, sticky notes created a web of connections on the walls, and laptops hummed constantly as we dug deeper into Sarah and Jason's deception. Look at this, Kira said, highlighting a series of transactions on her screen. Sarah started moving money into a private account right after Ethan's first round of chemotherapy failed. Small amounts at first, nothing that would raise red flags. But look at the pattern. I leaned in, studying the numbers. The transfers coincided with each major downturn in Ethan's condition. Every time we received bad news, every time a treatment failed, Sarah had moved more money. She had been using our son's deteriorating health as cover for her theft. There's more, Kira continued, pulling up another document. Remember those experimental treatments she insisted on? I cross-referenced the costs with standard medical, billing rates. She was inflating the numbers by almost 40% each time. The extra money went straight into an offshore account under a corporate name, Paradise Holdings LLC. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. She was stealing. And from Ethan's treatment fund? Not just stealing, Kira's voice was hard. She was actively limiting his options. Look at these dates. When you were discussing that new immunotherapy trial in Boston, she claimed it was too expensive. But the money was there. She had just diverted it to Paradise Holdings the week. Before, my hands clenched into fists. The immunotherapy trial had shown promising results in other children with Ethan's type of leukemia. We had gotten on the waiting list, but Sarah had insisted we couldn't afford the associated costs. Had that decision cost Ethan his chance? A knock at the study door interrupted our analysis. My mother entered, carrying a box I recognized from the attic. "I found something you need to see," she said, setting it down. "I've been going through old financial records, trying to help piece things together." Inside the box were documents dating back to the early days of our marriage. Bank statements, property records, and, most tellingly, papers from Sarah's parents' investment firm. Victoria and Robert Hayes hadn't just been covering for their daughter. They had been actively helping her construct her escape plan for years. Sarah's father's signature is all over these offshore account applications, Kira noted, examining the papers. He set up the corporate structure for Paradise Holdings through his firm. They've been planning this for months, maybe even years. The betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined. While I had been focusing all my energy on being there for Ethan, Sarah's entire family had been orchestrating an elaborate scheme to steal not just our money, but our son's chance at survival. My mother placed a hand on my shoulder. "There's something else," she said quietly. "I found this in Sarah's desk drawer when I was cleaning last week." She handed me a small leather-bound notebook. The first few pages contained normal notes, grocery lists, appointment reminders. But as I flipped further, the entries became more disturbing. Sarah had been documenting every aspect of Ethan's decline, not with a mother's concern, but with cold calculation. E's latest tests show no improvement. M too distracted by new treatment options to notice the Cayman transfer. J says, property. Prices in Maui rising. Need to move faster. V&R helping with paperwork. Everything proceeding according to plan. Kira read over my shoulder, her breath catching. She was tracking his illness like a business project, using his suffering to time her transactions. The notebook shook in my hands. Each entry revealed a new layer of Sarah's methodical betrayal. She hadn't just abandoned us, she had been orchestrating this escape since before Ethan's diagnosis, using his illness as the perfect cover for her schemes. "Wait," Kira said suddenly, grabbing her laptop. "The dates in her notebook. They match up with Jason's client meetings at the resort. She wasn't just meeting him for romance. They were coordinating their financial moves through his wealthy clients. The pieces began falling into place. Jason's position as a personal trainer at the luxury resort had given him access to wealthy clients looking for investment opportunities. Sarah's family's investment firm provided the legitimate front for their transactions. Together, they had created a sophisticated money laundering operation, all while presenting the image of a grieving mother and a dedicated personal trainer. Here's their mistake. Kira pointed to a series of transfers. They got cocky, started moving larger amounts, thinking no one would question a mother trying to save her sick child. But look at where the money actually went. Luxury car deposits, jewelry purchases, real estate consultations, all while Ethan was in the hospital fighting for his life. I thought back to those final weeks, how Sarah had insisted on handling all the medical bills herself. How she had discouraged me from discussing finances with the hospital administrators. How she had always had a reason why certain treatments were too risky or not cost-effective. She played us all, I said quietly, the weight of the truth crushing me. Used our trust, used Ethan's illness, used everyone's sympathy to hide what she was really doing. My mother picked up the notebook again, flipping to the last entry, dated just days before Ethan's death. Everything in place. Insurance policy confirmed. Property paperwork ready. Jay handling final arrangements through clients. After funeral, freedom. Can't wait to leave this life behind. The clinical detachment of her words made my blood run cold. This wasn't just opportunistic theft. This was calculated, premeditated exploitation of a dying child. My child. Our child. Michael, Kira said, her voice taking on a new urgency. There's something else you need to see. She pulled up an email chain between Sarah and Jason. They're not just planning to use the insurance money for their new life. They're planning to sell your house too. What? That's impossible. The house is in both our names. She can't sell it without my signature. Kira's expression darkened. According to these emails, she already has your signature. Multiple copies of it, in fact. They've been practicing forgery. My mother gasped softly. The refinancing papers she had you sign last month during Ethan's hospital stay, she must have used them to practice copying my signature. I finished. The realization dawning. All those documents, she claimed, needed immediate attention while Ethan was in crisis. They're moving fast, Kira warned, scanning through more emails. The property deal in Maui is set to close in 3 weeks. Once that happens, the money will be tied up in real estate. It'll be much harder to recover. I stood up, moving to the window that overlooked our backyard. Ethan's swing set still stood there, unused now but full of memories. How many times had I pushed him on those swings, even after he got sick, both of us pretending everything would be okay? How many times had Sarah watched from this very window, probably calculating her next move? So what do we do? My mother asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I turned back to face them, my decision made. We stop them. Not just from taking the money or selling the house. We make sure they face consequences for every single thing they've done, starting with fraud and ending with... I paused, the words bitter in my mouth. Child endangerment. Kira's eyebrows rose. Child endangerment? She deliberately withheld medical treatment options for financial gain, I said, my voice hard. She used Ethan's illness as a cover for theft. She prioritized her escape fund over his care. If that's not endangerment, I don't know what is. The room fell silent as the weight of this new direction settled over us. This wasn't just about catching a cheating spouse anymore. This was about justice for Ethan, about holding accountable everyone who had used his suffering for their own gain. First, I said, picking up Sarah's notebook, we document everything. Every transaction, every forged signature, every withheld treatment option. Then we take it all to someone who can help us build a case. Someone who won't back down, no matter how much money or influence the Hayes family has. I might know someone, Kira offered. A prosecutor I worked with on several fraud cases. She specializes in financial crimes, but she has a particular interest in cases involving medical fraud. My mother squeezed my hand. Ethan always said the good guys win in the end, she reminded me softly. Looking at the evidence spread across the study, at the proof of Sarah's calculated betrayal, I felt a cold certainty settle over me. They do, Mom, I replied, and we're going to make sure of it. The Hayes family investment firm occupied the top floor of Cedar Grove's only skyscraper, a modest 6-story building that Sarah's father, Robert, had always spoken of with outsized pride. Standing in the lobby now, looking up at the gold-lettered Hayes Investment Group sign, I felt a surge of anger at how they'd used their respectable family business as a front for their schemes. Remember, Kira whispered beside me, we're here just to gather information, in and out. She adjusted her blazer, looking every bit the part of a potential investor. The forged appointment card she'd created felt heavy in my pocket. A necessary deception to expose a greater fraud. The elevator ride to the 6th floor gave me time to steady my nerves. Just yesterday, Kira's contact at the prosecutor's office had confirmed our suspicions. The Hayes family hadn't just helped Sarah hide money. They'd been running a sophisticated fraud operation for years, using terminally ill patients' insurance policies as their personal piggy bank. The elevator doors opened to reveal Victoria Hayes herself, perfectly coiffed and professionally polished. As always, her smile faltered for just a moment when she saw me. "Michael, what an unexpected surprise!" "Hello, Victoria," I said, maintaining a neutral expression. "I hope you don't mind. I've been doing some financial planning. Given everything that's happened, I thought it was time to get professional advice." I gestured to Kira. "This is Catherine West, my financial consultant." Victoria's recovery was immediate, her society smile sliding back into place. Of course, although," she glanced at an appointment book on the receptionist's desk, "I don't see you on today's schedule." "That's strange," Kira replied smoothly, producing the appointment card. "I have it right here, scheduled with Robert specifically." Before Victoria could respond, Robert Hayes emerged from his office, his imposing frame filling the doorway. He'd always reminded me of a Wall Street banker from Central Casting, expensive suit, carefully maintained silver hair, and an air of absolute authority. Now I saw him differently, a predator in professional clothing. "Michael?" Robert's surprise seemed genuine. "I wasn't expecting—" "Mr. Thompson has some questions about family estate planning," Kira interrupted professionally. "Given recent events, I'm sure you understand the importance of securing his family's future." The subtle emphasis on family wasn't lost on Robert. His eyes narrowed slightly, but his professional mask stayed firmly in place. "Of course. Please come into my office." Victoria moved to follow, but Robert waved her off. "Dear, why don't you handle the Morrison meeting? Michael and I have some personal matters to discuss." The office was exactly as I remembered it from the few times I'd visited before. Dark wood, leather chairs, and a view of Cedar Grove that made everything below look small and insignificant. Family photos lined one wall, including several of Sarah and Ethan. My stomach turned at the sight of them. "So," Robert began, settling behind his massive desk, "what can I help you with today?" I pulled out a folder, not the one containing evidence of their crimes, but rather a collection of carefully selected documents that would appear innocent to the untrained eye. "I've been reviewing some of Ethan's medical expenses," I said, watching his face carefully, "and I've noticed some discrepancies." Robert's expression didn't change, but his hand moved slightly toward his desk drawer. "Discrepancies." Kira chimed in, pulling out her own documentation, specifically regarding the experimental treatment billings and certain offshore transfers made through Paradise Holdings LLC. The change in the room was instant. Robert's professional demeanor cracked, just for a moment, revealing something harder underneath. "I'm not familiar with that entity," he said carefully. "No?" I spread out several papers on his desk. "That's interesting, considering your signature is all over its incorporation documents. The same signature that appears on these transfer authorizations, moving money from Ethan's treatment fund into accounts in the Caymans." Robert's hand moved from the desk drawer to his phone. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we should reschedule when our compliance officer is available. Or perhaps," Kira suggested, her voice steel-wrapped in silk, "we should discuss this with the SEC instead. I'm sure they'd be very interested in how Hayes Investment Group has been handling terminally ill clients' funds." The color drained from Robert's face. "Whatever you think you know, we know everything." I cut him off, my voice low. "Every transaction, every forged document, every dollar stolen from families who were desperately trying to save their children, including my son." "Michael." Robert leaned forward, his voice taking on a patronizing tone I'd heard him use countless times before. "You're grieving, seeing conspiracies where there are only standard business practices. Sarah explained to us how unstable you've been since Ethan's diagnosis. The rage that flooded through me was almost blinding. Standard business practices? Is that what you call stealing from dying children? Is that what you call helping your daughter abandon her son so she could run off to Hawaii with her lover? Robert's mask slipped completely. Sarah deserved to be happy, he snapped. She deserved more than being tied down to a small-town life, watching her child die slowly while you insisted on throwing money at hopeless treatments. The silence that followed his outburst was deafening. Even he seemed shocked by his words. "Thank you for that," Kira said quietly, placing her phone on the desk, its recording app clearly displaying that it had captured every word. "I'm sure the prosecutor will find it very interesting." Robert's face went from pale to ashen. "You can't." "We can," I interrupted, "and we will. But first, you're going to tell us everything, every account, every transaction, every person involved in this scheme, starting with exactly how long you've been helping Sarah plan this." "I don't have to tell you anything," Robert blustered, but the fear in his eyes was evident. "You have no proof." "Actually," Kira pulled out another folder, "we have proof of at least 12 other cases where Hayes Investment Group targeted families with terminally ill children. Families who suddenly found their insurance policies modified, their treatment funds depleted, their assets mysteriously tied up in offshore accounts." I leaned forward, placing my hands on his desk. "You didn't just help Sarah betray me. You helped her deny Ethan treatments that could have saved his life, all so she could have her perfect escape funded by our son's death." Robert's composure crumbled entirely. "She's our daughter," he whispered. "We just wanted to protect her." "Protect her?" I laughed bitterly. "By helping her steal from her dying son, by using your firm to launder money through fake investment accounts, by forging documents and manipulating insurance policies?" "You don't understand," he protested weakly. "The firm, we needed the money. The recession hit us hard. When Sarah came to us about wanting to leave, we saw an opportunity to exploit desperate families," Kira finished, "to steal from children fighting for their lives." Robert slumped in his chair, suddenly, looking every bit his age. "What do you want?" "Everything," I said simply. "Every record, every account number, every name involved in this operation. You're going to help us dismantle this entire scheme, piece by piece." "And if I refuse?" I pulled out my phone, showing him an email draft addressed to every major news outlet in the state. "Then by this evening, every client of Hayes Investment Group will know exactly what kind of operation you've been running. I'm sure they'll be very interested in how you've been handling their money." The threat hung in the air between us. Robert looked at the family photos on his wall, his expression broken. "Sarah will never forgive us. Sarah lost the right to forgive anyone the moment she chose her paradise escape over her dying son," I replied coldly. "Now shall we begin?" As Robert Hayes began to talk, revealing the full scope of their family's corruption, I thought of Ethan. He had always believed in justice, had always insisted that in his beloved comic books the truth would eventually come to light. Looking at his grandfather's crumbling empire of lies, I knew that, at least in this case, Ethan had been right. District Attorney Elena Martinez's office felt too small for the magnitude of evidence spread across her desk. Files, bank statements, and interview transcripts covered every available surface, each piece adding to a picture of corruption that stretched far beyond my personal betrayal. "This is bigger than we initially thought," Elena said, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed Robert Hayes's sworn statement. "We're not just looking at personal fraud anymore. This is systematic exploitation of terminally ill patients across 3 states. Kira nodded, pulling up additional documentation on her laptop. Once Robert started talking, the whole scheme unraveled. The Hayes Investment Group didn't just help Sarah, they've been doing this for years. Targeting families when they're most vulnerable, manipulating insurance policies, skimming from treatment funds. 17 families, I added quietly, looking at the list of victims we'd compiled. 17 children like Ethan, whose care was compromised because of their greed. Elena leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. The good news is, we have enough evidence for multiple federal charges: wire fraud, insurance fraud, money laundering, and with Robert Hayes's testimony, we can prove intent. And Sarah? I asked, the name still bitter on my tongue. What about her role in all this? Your wife wasn't just a participant, Elena replied, pulling out a specific set of emails. Based on these communications, she was often the one identifying potential targets through her work at the hospital. Her position as a hospital administrator gave her access to financial information, insurance details. The revelation hit me hard. All those times Sarah had stayed late at work, claiming she was reviewing patient files, she had been hunting for vulnerable families to exploit. Looking back, I remembered how she'd sometimes mention other parents in the oncology ward, making casual comments about their insurance coverage or financial situations. We've also found evidence that she was receiving kickbacks, Kira added, her voice tight with controlled anger. Every time she steered a desperate family toward her father's firm for financial planning, she got a percentage of whatever they managed to steal. My hands clenched into fists. Even before Ethan got sick? Yes, Elena confirmed softly. Mr. Thompson, I have to ask, are you prepared for what comes next? Once we move forward with charges, this will become very public. Your son's story will be part of a larger investigation. The media will be involved. I thought of Ethan's Superman cape still hanging in his closet. He had always said that superheroes had to make tough choices to fight evil. Do it, I said firmly. Use whatever you need to bring them down. Just protect the other family's privacy if you can. They've been through enough. Elena nodded, pulling out a legal pad. Here's how we'll proceed. First, we freeze all assets connected to Hayes Investment Group. That includes the property in Hawaii that Sarah and her boyfriend were planning to buy. Jason's already trying to distance himself, Kira interjected. He's been calling mutual friends, claiming he had no idea about the fraud, that Sarah told him the money was legitimate. Let him squirm, Elena said dismissively. We have enough evidence to prove his involvement too. Those investment consultations he was running through the resort. That's securities fraud, given that he's not licensed. She began outlining our strategy on a whiteboard, creating a timeline of actions. Asset freeze and initial arrests too. Public announcement of investigation. Coordination with FBI Financial Crimes Unit 4. Depositions of key witnesses, FIF. Grand jury. Presentation. The most important thing, Elena emphasized, is that we move quickly. Sarah and Jason still think they're in control. They don't know that Robert has turned on them, or that we've uncovered the larger scheme. My mother, who had been quietly observing from a corner chair, spoke up. What about Victoria? Sarah's mother? Eleanor's expression hardened. Mrs. Hayes was more involved than she appears. Those forged documents needed a notary's signature. Guess who provided them? The pieces clicked into place. Victoria's insistence on being present for all of Sarah's paperwork, her convenient availability whenever documents needed to be signed. She hadn't just been a supportive mother, she'd been an active participant in the fraud. Tomorrow morning, Elena continued, we'll execute simultaneous search warrants at Hayes Investment Group, the Hayes residence, and Sarah's office at the hospital. We already have teams in Hawaii ready to move on Sarah and Jason. The thought of Sarah being arrested on her paradise escape carried a certain poetic justice, but I felt no satisfaction. Nothing about this would bring Ethan back or undo the damage they'd caused to so many families. There's something else you should know, Kira said, pulling up another email chain. Sarah's been writing a memoir. She's apparently pitched it to several publishers, a story about escaping a toxic marriage and finding true love while dealing with the tragic loss of her child. The rage that surged through me was unlike anything I'd felt before. She's trying to profit from his death, Again. The publishers won't touch it now, Elena assured me, not once the fraud charges become public. But it shows her state of mind, her capacity for manipulation. The jury will see exactly who she is. We spent the next several hours going through testimonies from other affected families. Each story was a variation on the same theme. Parents, desperate to save their children, turning to Hayes' investment group for help, only to find themselves victims of an elaborate scheme. "What about the insurance money?" I asked finally. "Ethan's policy, already frozen," Elena confirmed, "along with all assets tied to Paradise Holdings LLC. They won't see a penny of it. In fact, we're working to establish a restitution fund for all the families they've defrauded." My mother reached for my hand. "Ethan would be proud," she said softly. "You're not just getting justice for him. You're helping all those other children too." Elena began assigning tasks, coordinating with various law enforcement agencies. The machinery of justice was finally moving, preparing to crush the elaborate house of cards Sarah and her family had built. "One last thing," Eleanor said as we prepared to leave. "Once the arrests are made, there will be press coverage, a lot of it. How do you want to handle that?" I thought carefully before responding. "Tell the truth, all of it. These people didn't just commit financial crimes. They stole hope from dying children. The world should know exactly what they did." As we left the DA's office, the weight of what was coming settled over me. Tomorrow, Sarah's perfect escape plan would crumble. Her paradise would become a prison, her dreams of a new life shattered by the consequences of her own actions. Kira touched my arm gently. "Are you ready for this?" I looked at the sunset painting, Cedar Grove's skyline in shades of orange and purple. Ethan had always loved this time of day, saying it looked like a superhero had painted the sky. "Yes," I replied, thinking of all the families who had suffered because of Sarah and the Hayes' greed. It's time for the truth to come out. All of it. Tomorrow would bring chaos, arrests, media coverage, the exposure of a years-long criminal enterprise. But tonight, I felt a strange sense of peace. Ethan had always believed that justice would prevail in the end. Finally, I was going to prove him right. The Hawaiian sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as FBI agents surrounded the oceanfront villa where Sarah and Jason had been hiding out. I watched the live feed from Elena's office, my heart pounding, as tactical teams moved into position. The paradise they'd bought with stolen money was about to become their prison. "Teams are in position," the FBI coordinator announced over the secure line. "Simultaneous raids beginning in 3, 2, 1. The feed split into multiple screens. Agents breaching the Hawaii villa, local police entering Hayes Investment Group, and federal marshals approaching the Hayes family residence. Years of fraud and deception were about to come crashing down. In a single coordinated moment, "This is the FBI. Sarah Thompson, Jason Miller. Come out with your hands up." Through the beach-facing cameras, we watched as Sarah emerged onto the villa's balcony, wearing a designer bikini and carrying what looked like a mimosa. The confusion on her face quickly turned to horror as she realized what was happening. Jason appeared behind her, his muscled frame tensing as he spotted the agents. "They're running!" someone shouted, but there was nowhere to go. The beach was covered, the water access blocked by Coast Guard vessels. We watched as Sarah and Jason were quickly apprehended, the look of entitlement on their faces morphing into shocked disbelief as they were handcuffed. Meanwhile, in Cedar Grove, Robert and Victoria Hayes were being led out of their mansion in matching bathrobes, their carefully cultivated image of respectability shattered by the federal agents escorting them to waiting vehicles. News vans were already gathering, cameras flashing as the pillars of local society were exposed as fraudsters. "Mr. Thompson," Eleanor's assistant poked her head in. "They're ready for your statement." I nodded, straightening my tie. We'd prepared for this moment, crafted a statement that would help the other families understand they weren't alone, that justice was finally being served. But first, I had unfinished business. Patch me through to Sarah's processing center, I requested. Elena raised an eyebrow, but nodded to the technician. After a few moments, Sarah's face appeared on one of the screens. She was seated in an interrogation room, her perfect beach waves now disheveled, her tan somehow making her look sallow under the fluorescent lights. "Michael!" Her voice cracked with disbelief. What is this? What have you done?" "What have I done?" I kept my voice steady, letting her hear the steel beneath the calm. "I've exposed the truth, Sarah, about everything. The fraud, the stolen money, the exploitation of dying children, including our son." She flinched at the mention of Ethan, but quickly recovered. "You don't understand. I had to get out. That life was suffocating me, watching him die slowly day by day." "So you stole from his treatment fund?" I cut her off. "Used his illness to scout other families to exploit, turned his death into your ticket to paradise." "I never," she began, but I wasn't finished. "We found your notebook, Sarah. Every calculated move, every stolen dollar, how you worked with your parents to target vulnerable families, how you chose Hawaii because extradition would be difficult, how you planned to use Ethan's insurance, money for a down payment on your love nest with Jason." The color drained from her face. "My father told you?" "Your father told us everything. The whole operation, every family you targeted, every policy you manipulated. It's over, Sarah. Paradise just became a prison." She lunged forward suddenly, her composed facade cracking completely. "You had no right. That money was mine. I deserved—" "You deserved." My voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "What exactly did you deserve, Sarah? The right to steal from dying children? The right to deny our son treatment so you could stockpile cash for your escape? The right to turn his death into your golden ticket?" "I was trapped," she screamed, mascara running down her cheeks. "In that small town with a dying child and a husband who couldn't see I was drowning. Jason understood me. Jason's already trying to make a deal," I interrupted coldly, "throwing you and your family under the bus to save himself. Turns out paradise isn't so perfect when the FBI comes knocking." The news hit her like a physical blow. She slumped in her chair, the last vestiges of her carefully constructed image crumbling. "The house," she whispered. "The accounts. Frozen. All of it. Every penny you stole, every asset you acquired, it's all being seized. The money will go to a restitution fund for the families you helped destroy." "You can't do this to me," she tried one last time, attempting to summon the manipulation. That had worked so well for so long. "Think about all we shared, about Ethan. Don't you dare say his name." My voice could have frozen fire. "You lost that right when you used his death as your get-out-of-jail-free card. Though I suppose free isn't quite accurate anymore, is it?" A commotion outside the interrogation room drew her attention. Through the window, we could see Jason being led past in handcuffs, his head down as he spoke intently with a federal agent. "He's giving them everything," I informed her. "Every conversation, every plan, every detail about how you identified vulnerable families through your hospital position. Apparently, his loyalty is as shallow as your grief." Sarah's face crumpled as the reality of her situation finally hit home. Her perfect escape plan, funded by stolen money and broken dreams, had turned into a nightmare. But I felt no satisfaction in her tears, no triumph in her downfall. There was only a hollow sense of justice being served. "The press conference starts in 5 minutes, Elena reminded me gently. I looked at Sarah one last time, this stranger who had once been my wife, who had turned our son's tragedy into a criminal enterprise. "Goodbye, Sarah. I'd say, see you in court, but I won't be attending your fraud trial. I'll be too busy helping your other victims get justice." "Michael, please," she began, but I cut the feed, her pleas disappearing into static. Outside Eleanor's office, reporters had gathered in force. The story was exploding across national news. Prominent family exposed in massive fraud scheme targeting families of terminally ill children. As I straightened my tie and prepared to face the cameras, I felt Ethan's presence more strongly than ever. "Ready?" Eleanor asked, holding the door. I touched the Superman pin on my lapel, one of Ethan's favorites, and nodded, ready to tell the truth, all of it. As we stepped into the flashbulb storm of cameras, I thought of all the families who would finally see justice. Sarah and her accomplices had thought they could steal hope from the desperate and turn tragedy into profit. Instead, they had united their victims into a force for change, a voice for accountability. The podium awaited, and with it, the chance to expose the full scope of their crimes to the world. Sarah had wanted to write a memoir about escaping her old life. Instead, she would become a cautionary tale about greed, betrayal, and the consequences of exploiting society's most vulnerable. For Ethan, and for all the children whose lives had been treated as commodities by the Hayes family's schemes, justice was finally being served. It wouldn't bring them back, wouldn't undo the damage done, but it would ensure that their stories were heard, and that those responsible faced the consequences of their actions. As I began to speak into the forest of microphones, I knew that somewhere Ethan was watching, and for the first time since his death, I felt certain that I had lived up to his belief in heroes and justice. The federal courthouse in Boston hummed with tension as Sarah and her co-defendants were led in for arraignment. 3 months had passed since the arrests, and the case had exploded into what media outlets were calling the Paradise Fraud, one of the largest medical exploitation schemes in recent history. I sat in the gallery beside Kira, watching as Sarah, Jason, and the Hayes family were brought in wearing prison jumpsuits instead of their usual designer clothes. The contrast between Sarah's current appearance and the glamorous beach photos from Hawaii was stark. Gone was the carefree smile, replaced by dark circles under her eyes and a pallor that even prison makeup couldn't hide. Elena had warned me that the arraignment would be challenging, but nothing could have prepared me for the magnitude of charges. Being read aloud by the federal prosecutor, the United States versus Sarah Thompson, Jason Miller, Robert Hayes, Victoria Hayes, and Hayes Investment Group LLC. Charges include conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, insurance fraud, exploitation of terminally ill persons, forgery of medical documents. The list went on, each charge adding years to their potential sentences. Sarah seemed to shrink with each count, while Jason fidgeted nervously, constantly whispering to his attorney. Robert and Victoria Hayes sat stone-faced, their once proud bearing reduced to rigid desperation. How did the defendants plead? Jason was first, practically jumping to his feet. "Guilty, Your Honor, with a cooperation agreement." He avoided looking at Sarah, whose head snapped up at his words. The betrayal she had inflicted on so many others had finally come full circle. Robert and Victoria Hayes also pleaded guilty, their voices barely audible in the packed courtroom. Their plea deals had been negotiated weeks ago, trading information for slightly reduced sentences, but the evidence they provided had blown the case wide open, revealing a network of fraud that stretched back nearly a decade. When it was Sarah's turn, she stood slowly, her chains clinking in the silence. "Not guilty, Your Honor," a murmur ran through the courtroom. Despite the mountain of evidence, despite her co-conspirators' confessions, she was still trying to maintain her innocence. The judge's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "The state calls for pre-trial detention, Your Honor," the prosecutor announced. "Given the defendant's previous attempt to flee the country and access to hidden assets, we consider her a significant flight risk." Sarah's attorney argued for bail, citing her community ties and previously spotless record. But the evidence Elena and Kira had uncovered painted a different picture. Bank records showed that even after the arrests, Sarah had attempted to access offshore accounts. Several fake passports had been found in the Hawaii villa, along with documents outlining potential escape routes to non-extradition countries. "Bail denied," the judge declared firmly. "The defendant will remain in custody pending trial." As Sarah was led away, she caught my eye for the first time. The hatred in her gaze was palpable, but beneath it I saw something else: fear. The reality of her situation was finally hitting home. Her perfect escape plan had transformed into a prison cell, and her dreams of paradise had dissolved into the nightmare of a federal indictment. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed for statements. Elena had prepared me for this, helping me craft responses that would support the prosecution while maintaining dignity for all the victims. "Mr. Thompson, how do you respond to your wife's not guilty plea? What do you say to the other families affected by this scheme? Is it true that the fraud prevented your son from receiving potentially life-saving treatments?" I stepped up to the microphone, feeling the weight of Ethan's Superman pin on my lapel. "This case is bigger than my personal tragedy," I began, my voice steady. "The Hayes family and their conspirators didn't just steal money, they stole hope from families, fighting for their children's lives. Today is the first step toward justice, not just for my son Ethan, but for every child who was treated as a commodity in their scheme." The evidence presented at the preliminary hearings was damning. Email trails showed Sarah using her hospital, positioned to identify potential victims, families with terminally ill children and substantial insurance policies. She would befriend them, gain their trust, then steer them toward Hayes' investment group for financial planning. Robert Hayes would then manipulate their accounts, using a complex web of transfers and fake investment vehicles to siphon money from treatment funds. Victoria's notary stamp validated forged documents, while Jason's position at the resort provided a way to launder the stolen funds through fake investment consultations. But the most shocking evidence came from Sarah's own records. Her detailed notebook, which she had arrogantly kept as research for her planned memoir, provided a blueprint of the entire operation. The clinical way she described exploiting desperate families made even seasoned prosecutors flinch. One entry about Ethan particularly stood out. His latest treatment failed, perfect timing, M2 distraught to notice the transfer, premium increases on policy approved, 2 more months max before paradise. When that entry was read in court, several jurors openly wept. Sarah's attorney attempted to paint her as a desperate mother coping with grief, but her own words revealed the calculated nature of her actions. The trial itself became a media sensation. Every day brought new revelations about the scope of the fraud. Other victims came forward, sharing stories of how the Hayes family had exploited their darkest moments. The pattern was always the same: targeting families when they were most vulnerable, using their desperation as a weapon against them. Jason's testimony proved particularly devastating. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he provided detailed accounts of how Sarah had orchestrated the scheme, including recordings of their conversations planning their escape. "She said it was perfect timing," he testified, avoiding Sarah's glare from the defense table. Said her son's condition meant nobody would question large transfers or policy changes. Said her husband was too broken to notice anything. The prosecution presented financial records showing how they had systematically drained Ethan's treatment fund, diverting money meant for potentially life-saving procedures into their escape fund. Expert testimony suggested that if all resources had been properly directed toward his care, Ethan might have been eligible for experimental treatments that had shown promise in similar cases. This revelation nearly broke me. The thought that Sarah's greed might have cost Ethan even a chance at survival was almost unbearable. But Kira's steady presence beside me in court and my mother's unwavering support at home helped me maintain my composure. As the trial progressed, Sarah's facade of innocence crumbled under the weight of evidence. Her own parents' testimony about her role in identifying and exploiting vulnerable families left no room for doubt about her culpability. Victoria Hayes, in a shocking moment of clarity during cross-examination, broke down and addressed me directly. "We thought we were just helping Sarah escape a situation that made her unhappy. We never imagined. I'm sorry, Michael, we're all so sorry. But sorry couldn't bring back Ethan. Sorry couldn't restore hope to the families they had destroyed. Sorry couldn't erase the fact that they had turned children's suffering into profit." The prosecution's closing argument was powerful in its simplicity. This is not just a case about fraud. This is a case about the deliberate exploitation of society's most vulnerable members, dying children, and their desperate parents. The defendants didn't just steal money, they stole time, hope, and possibilities from families already fighting their hardest battles. They turned tragedy into opportunity, suffering into profit, and a child's death into a ticket to paradise. Today, you have the power to ensure that paradise becomes their prison. As the jury retired to deliberate, I clutched Ethan's Superman pin, remembering his unwavering belief in justice. The verdict wouldn't bring him back, but it would ensure that Sarah and her accomplices could never hurt another family the way they had hurt us. The verdict came down like thunder, guilty on all counts. Sarah's face remained frozen as the jury foreman read through each charge, her carefully maintained mask finally cracking when the judge announced her sentence. 25 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for at least 18 years. Paradise had become a concrete cell. Jason received 15 years due to his cooperation, while Robert and Victoria Hayes were sentenced to 12 years each. The court also ordered complete asset forfeiture. Every penny they had stolen would be returned to their victims through a restitution fund. But the most significant victory wasn't the prison sentences or the financial penalties. It was what came after, born from the ashes of their crimes. Standing on the steps of Cedar Grove Hospital 6 months after the sentencing, I faced a crowd of reporters, families, and supporters for a very different kind of announcement. "Today, we're launching the Ethan Thompson Foundation for Medical Justice," I began, my voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "Using the recovered funds from the Hayes fraud case, we're establishing a watchdog organization dedicated to protecting families of terminally ill children from financial exploitation." Beside me, Elena smiled encouragingly. She had helped structure the foundation, ensuring it would have real power to investigate and prevent similar schemes. Kira, now our lead financial investigator, stood ready to present the Foundation's first initiatives. "The Foundation will provide 3 essential services," I continued. "First, free financial oversight for families dealing with severe medical situations. Second, legal advocacy for victims of medical fraud. And third, a grant program to help families access experimental treatments that insurance won't cover." The crowd stirred at this last point. Many of them were families who had been victimized by Sarah and the Hayes' scheme. They understood, better than anyone, how desperate parents could be exploited when fighting for their children's lives. "But we're not stopping there," I announced. "Thanks to cooperation with federal authorities, we've identified similar schemes operating in other states. The Foundation will work with law enforcement and healthcare providers to prevent more families from being targeted during their most vulnerable moments." The first case we tackled involved a family in Oregon whose daughter was battling a rare form of brain cancer. Their insurance company had denied coverage for an experimental treatment, and a financial advisor had approached them with a too-good-to-be-true solution. Thanks to our intervention, we discovered the advisor was running a scam similar to the Hayes operation. The Foundation provided legal support and secured proper coverage for the treatment. which ultimately helped save the child's life. Back in my office at the Foundation headquarters, formerly the Hayes Investment Group building, now repurposed for good, I looked at the wall of photos. Each one showed a child we'd helped, a family we'd protected, a small victory against the darkness that had claimed Ethan. Mr. Thompson, my assistant, poked her head in. The support group is ready. The Foundation ran weekly support meetings for families of terminally ill children, providing both emotional support and practical guidance. Today's session was special. We were introducing a new program to help parents navigate the complex world of medical billing and insurance claims. As I entered the meeting room, I saw faces that had become familiar over the past months. Parents, at various stages of their journeys, some still fighting for their children's lives, others, like me, learning to live with loss while helping others avoid the pitfalls we'd encountered. Before we begin, I said, taking my place in the circle, I want to share some news. The medical billing transparency bill we've been supporting, inspired by what we learned from the Hayes case, just passed the state legislature. Starting next month, hospitals will be required to provide detailed breakdowns of all treatment costs and insurance coverage before beginning any experimental procedures. The room erupted in applause. It was a small victory, but an important one. The kind of oversight that might have exposed Sarah's scheme earlier, that might have saved other families from exploitation. Later that evening, I visited Ethan's room, now converted into the Foundation's Children's Resource Center. His comic books lined the shelves, available for young patients to read during their hospital stays. His Superman cape hung framed on the wall, alongside photos of him in the hospital, always smiling, always believing in hope. My mother found me there, looking at his things. He would be so proud, she said softly, squeezing my hand. You've turned something terrible into something beautiful. I had to, I replied, touching the glass over his cape. Sarah and her family thought they could profit from children's suffering. We had to show that good can come even from the darkest betrayal. The Foundation was growing faster than we'd anticipated. Hospitals across the country were implementing our financial oversight protocols. Law enforcement agencies were using our guidelines to identify and investigate potential fraud schemes. We'd even started a scholarship program for medical students, committed to working in pediatric oncology. But the most meaningful impact came from the individual stories. Like Tommy, a 7-year-old leukemia patient whose parents had been approached by another fraudulent investment group. Our intervention not only protected their assets, but helped them access a clinical trial that showed promising results. Or Maria, whose parents spoke little English and had been targeted by scammers claiming to offer miracle cures. The Foundation provided translators, legal support, and connected them with legitimate treatment options. Each success story felt like a small victory against the darkness that had taken Ethan. Each family we helped was another blow against the greed and exploitation that Sarah and the Hayes family had represented. The Foundation's work also led to unexpected healing. Other parents who had lost children to illness found purpose in volunteering. Medical professionals, angry at how their patients had been exploited, offered their services pro bono. Even some former Hayes Investment Group employees, horrified by what their firm had done, now worked for us, using their financial expertise to protect rather than exploit. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I received an email that made my heart stop. It was from the warden at Sarah's prison, forwarding a message she had asked to be sent to me. I see what you've built from the ashes of what I destroyed. Part of me wants to hate you for it, but I can't. Ethan would have loved this. He always did believe in heroes. I'm sorry I couldn't be one for him. I deleted the email without responding. Sarah's remorse, if it was even genuine, came far too late. But in a way, she had helped create something important. Her crimes had exposed a vulnerability in the system that we were now working to fix. Her betrayal had led to protections that would help countless other families. Looking out over Cedar Grove as the sun set, I thought about how far we'd come. The foundation was more than just a response to tragedy. It was a promise kept to Ethan and to every child failed by those meant to protect them. "Ready to head home?" Kira asked, appearing in my doorway with a stack of files. "We've got that meeting tomorrow with the FBI's new medical fraud task force." I nodded, gathering my things. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families to help, new battles to fight. But for now, I felt peace knowing that we had turned betrayal into blessing, pain into purpose. Ethan's favorite Superman quote hung above my desk. "What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Find out what you're really fighting for, and you become both." We had found what we were fighting for, and we weren't stopping anytime soon. 1 year to the day after Sarah's arrest, I stood before Ethan's grave in Cedar Grove Cemetery. The morning air was crisp, leaves dancing across the perfectly maintained grass. His headstone, simple yet elegant, bore the inscription he had chosen himself during his final weeks. "Every superhero needs an origin story." I placed his worn Superman cape on the grave, letting the familiar fabric rest against the cool stone. The foundation had helped dozens of families by now, prevented countless scams, and changed laws to protect vulnerable parents. But here, in this quiet moment, I was just a father missing his son. "Your dad's doing good things, buddy," my mother said softly, appearing beside me with a bouquet of bright flowers, the kind Ethan used to say looked like fireworks. "He's helping so many people." The Foundation's latest victory had made national news. 3 more fraud rings similar to the Hayes operation had been exposed, leading to new federal legislation dubbed Ethan's Law, comprehensive protections for families dealing with catastrophic medical situations. Sarah, watching from her prison cell, had even provided testimony to help strengthen the law, though I suspected her cooperation was more about reduced privileges than genuine remorse. "I got another letter from her yesterday," I told my mother, watching as she arranged the flowers. "She's still asking to meet, says she wants to help the Foundation's work from inside." Mum's hands stilled on the flowers. And nothing. Some things can't be fixed with an apology or good behavior. Some betrayals run too deep. The sound of approaching footsteps made us both turn. Kira walked toward us, holding her own small bouquet. Over the past year, she had become more than just an ally in exposing Sarah and Jason's crimes. Her determination to protect other families, her understanding of loss and betrayal, had created a bond neither of us had expected. "The new family support center opens today," she reminded me gently. "The one we named after Ethan. Are you ready?" I nodded, but took another moment at the grave. The past year had brought justice, purpose, and even unexpected joy. The Foundation's work had given meaning to our pain, turned private tragedy into public good. But here, before my son's resting place, I could acknowledge the cost of that transformation. Or Maria, whose parents spoke little English and had been targeted by scammers claiming to offer miracle cures. The Foundation provided translators, legal support, and connected them with legitimate treatment options. Each success story felt like a small victory against the darkness that had taken Ethan. Each family we helped was another blow against the greed and exploitation that Sarah and the Hayes family had represented. The Foundation's work also led to unexpected healing. Other parents who had lost children to illness found purpose in volunteering. Medical professionals, angry at how their patients had been exploited, offered their services pro bono. Even some former Hayes Investment Group employees, horrified by what their firm had done, now worked for us, using their financial expertise to protect rather than exploit. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I received an email that made my heart stop. It was from the warden at Sarah's prison, forwarding a message she had asked to be sent to me. "I see what you've built from the ashes of what I destroyed. Part of me wants to hate you for it, but I can't. Ethan would have loved this. He always did believe in heroes. I'm sorry I couldn't be one for him." I deleted the email without responding. Sarah's remorse, if it was even genuine, came far too late. But in a way, she had helped create something important. Her crimes had exposed a vulnerability in the system that we were now working to fix. Her betrayal had led to protections that would help countless other families. Looking out over Cedar Grove as the sun set, I thought about how far we'd come. The foundation was more than just a response to tragedy. It was a promise kept to Ethan and to every child failed by those meant to protect them. "Ready to head home?" Kira asked, appearing in my doorway with a stack of files. "We've got that meeting tomorrow with the FBI's new medical fraud task force." I nodded, gathering my things. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families to help, new battles to fight. But for now, I felt peace knowing that we had turned betrayal into blessing, pain into purpose. Ethan's favorite Superman quote hung above my desk. "What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Find out what you're really fighting for, and you become both." We had found what we were fighting for, and we weren't stopping anytime soon. 1 year to the day after Sarah's arrest, I stood before Ethan's grave in Cedar Grove Cemetery. The morning air was crisp, leaves dancing across the perfectly maintained grass. His headstone, simple yet elegant, bore the inscription he had chosen himself during his final weeks. "Every superhero needs an origin story." I placed his worn Superman cape on the grave, letting the familiar fabric rest against the cool stone. The foundation had helped dozens of families by now, prevented countless scams, and changed laws to protect vulnerable parents. But here, in this quiet moment, I was just a father missing his son. "Your dad's doing good things, buddy," my mother said softly, appearing beside me with a bouquet of bright flowers, the kind Ethan used to say looked like fireworks. "He's helping so many people." The Foundation's latest victory had made national news. 3 more fraud rings similar to the Hayes operation had been exposed, leading to new federal legislation dubbed Ethan's Law, comprehensive protections for families dealing with catastrophic medical situations. Sarah, watching from her prison cell, had even provided testimony to help strengthen the law, though I suspected her cooperation was more about reduced privileges than genuine remorse. "I got another letter from her yesterday," I told my mother, watching as she arranged the flowers. "She's still asking to meet, says she wants to help the Foundation's work from inside." Mum's hands stilled on the flowers. And nothing. Some things can't be fixed with an apology or good behavior. Some betrayals run too deep. The sound of approaching footsteps made us both turn. Kira walked toward us, holding her own small bouquet. Over the past year, she had become more than just an ally in exposing Sarah and Jason's crimes. Her determination to protect other families, her understanding of loss and betrayal, had created a bond neither of us had expected. "The new family support center opens today," she reminded me gently. "The one we named after Ethan. Are you ready?" I nodded, but took another moment at the grave. The past year had brought justice, purpose, and even unexpected joy. The Foundation's work had given meaning to our pain, turned private tragedy into public good. But here, before my son's resting place, I could acknowledge the cost of that transformation. "He would have loved the center," my mother said, as we walked back to our cars. "All those comics and games for the kids, the quiet rooms for parents, the counselors and financial advisors ready to help. It's exactly what we needed back then." She was right. The Ethan Thompson Family Support Center was everything we had wished for during our darkest days. A place of comfort, protection, and practical help for families fighting impossible battles. The Hayes fortune, seized by federal authorities and awarded to victims, had funded its creation. There was poetry in that, turning stolen money back into hope. The center itself was housed in what had once been the Hayes Investment Group's flagship building. Where Sarah's family had once plotted to exploit desperate parents, social workers and counselors now offered genuine support. Where fake investment schemes had been hatched, real financial advisors now protected families from fraud. As we pulled into the parking lot, I saw them, dozens of families gathering for the opening, parents whose children we'd helped save, parents who, like me, carried the weight of loss but had found purpose in protection. Even some of the prosecutors and FBI agents who had worked on Sarah's case had come to show support. The ceremony was brief but powerful. Elena, who had become a fierce advocate for medical fraud prevention, spoke about how one case had sparked a national movement. Kira shared her journey from vengeful ex-wife to passionate defender of vulnerable families. And then it was my turn. Standing at the podium, looking out at faces that had become family over the past year, I felt Ethan's presence strongly. A year ago, I stood in this town's cathedral, saying goodbye to my son, while discovering the deepest betrayal imaginable. Today, I stand before you to celebrate how light can emerge from darkness, how purpose can rise from pain. This center represents everything my son believed in, that heroes can come from anywhere, that good triumphs over evil, that every story, even the sad ones, can have meaning. The ribbon cutting was emotional, but it was what came after that truly mattered. Watching families tour the facility, seeing children gravitate toward the reading nook filled with Ethan's beloved comics, observing parents relax as they realized they weren't alone. It felt like a promise fulfilled. Later that evening, as the sunset painted the sky in Ethan's favorite colors, Kira found me in what had once been Sarah's office, now transformed into a cheerful counseling space. "A penny for your thoughts?" she asked, perching on the windowsill. "Just thinking about circles," I replied. "How this place went from causing pain to healing it. How betrayal led to trust. How loss created purpose." She nodded, understanding, in her eyes. "And us? Another circle?" The question hung in the air between us. Over the past year, our shared mission had evolved into something deeper. We had both been betrayed by people we loved, both lost something precious, but in fighting to protect others, we had found each other. "Maybe some circles are meant to close," I said softly, reaching for her hand. As night fell over Cedar Grove, the center's lights glowed warmly, a beacon for families in need. In my pocket, I carried Ethan's favorite Superman pin, not as a reminder of loss, but as a symbol of purpose. Sarah had chosen paradise over parenthood, had tried to turn tragedy into profit. Instead, she had unwittingly sparked a movement that would protect countless families from similar exploitation. The Foundation's work would continue, expanding to new cities, helping more families, preventing more fraud. Ethan's law would ensure that no parent fighting for their child's life would face financial predators alone. The support center would stand as a testament to how love could triumph over greed, how purpose could emerge from pain. And me? I had learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means building something meaningful from the ashes of loss. It means allowing new joy while honoring old grief. It means recognizing that even the darkest betrayal can lead to unexpected light. Kira and I left the center that night, hand in hand, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Ethan would have called it a superhero signal, a sign that good was winning somewhere in the world. Looking at what we had built, at the families we had helped and would continue to help, I knew he was right. Some betrayals break you. Others reveal your true strength. In the end, Sarah's paradise had become a prison, while my prison of grief had become a paradise of purpose. And somewhere, I hoped, Ethan was smiling at the justice of it all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.